Hey, deserving listeners, after posting some of my videos on borderline abuse, I received a number of emails in response, and I thought I would review those emails here. We have an email from patron and YouTube member William from Columbia, South Carolina. He says, as somebody who has suffered from borderline abuse in the past, your exposition of these concepts through Chelsea and Jimmy's relationship on Love is Blind Season 6 is illuminating and helpful to me. Thank you for your hard work. Well, William, you're very welcome, and thanks for reaching out. I am curious about your thoughts on this idea. Let's say that Jimmy, in fact, was not attracted to Chelsea. Let's say that Jimmy, in fact, was not attracted to Chelsea and was being fake to some extent in his attraction towards her. So he's not attracted, he's faking being attracted, but was saying that he was attracted. So he's saying he's attracted, but he's faking being attracted. This is this thought experiment that William was putting forth. Perhaps the disconnect that Chelsea experienced between Jimmy's words and his behavior and emotion amplified her seemingly paranoid and abusive behavior. What do you think? End of email. Yeah, it's possible. We can't know. That certainly is the narrative that was being put forth. I didn't see any evidence of that. It seemed like the edit was trying to make it look like that. And the Megan Fox thing didn't help, of course. But I think all indications were pointing in the direction that Jimmy was absolutely attracted to her and was having a very uncomplicated attraction toward his fiancée. But we can't know. But yeah, that would complicate things if it were true. It's possible that it would. I wouldn't put a lot of money down that I'm right about that because it's just hard to say. But yeah, that would complicate things for Chelsea, that you're already worried and prone to paranoia and distortions around the threat of attachment loss around every corner. And then you are being told that your partner loves you and is attracted to you, but then you just get this vibe or this nonverbal or this reactivity that says something differently or says something different, and you start to focus, or you have a feeling of non-attraction, and you start to look for some evidence of that, like, why am I feeling this way? And then you identify that friend or whatever, or Jess is out there somewhere, and you voice those concerns instead of just speaking from the foundation, which is, I feel like maybe you're not attracted to me. What's going on? Yeah, it's possible. And more broadly, those kinds of what we call crazy-making situations can drive people, quote-unquote, crazy. When you're getting two communications from the same person that are opposite. The classic example that we talk about in my field is the double bind, in that you have a parent that is saying, come here, to a child. Come here, I love you, hug me. How come you're not loving me? And the child comes toward the parent, and then the parent, upon hugging, it feels like the parent is resisting the child and pushing the child away, or uncomfortable with the hug and embrace. And the child is experiencing a double bind because they're being bound to come forward and they're being bound to move away. And it can cause people to have issues from that point forward. You can imagine, right? You have a very complicated idea of what attachment looks like. You have a complicated idea of what your own affection is experienced as. You have a complicated idea of communication and of attachment. Anyway, anonymous YouTube member, she says, these are all emails, right? And if you want to email, go to the website. You can email there. The link should be below. Anonymous YouTube member, she says, I have devoured your series on Love is Blind, borderline abuse. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to see the comparisons between the couples. Yeah, it was fascinating to me. At the same time, I'm confused and looking for clarity on the overlap, if any, between borderline and preoccupied attachment. At times in the series, you mentioned borderline and preoccupied in the same sentence. Also, your analysis previously of Nick and Danielle described Danielle's behavior as potentially aligned with preoccupied attachment. Is there any connection between the two? End of email. It's a great question, very observant, and a good question. And I'm glad to provide this clarification because I probably was being a bit confusing. I try to say that borderline and preoccupied are not the same thing, but when I'm quickly going over these things, I will include the two labels because I am trying to highlight something. I'm also trying to catch a lot of different possibilities. Someone that presents as Chelsea, for myself, I might conclude that they don't suffer from a personality disorder, but they do have pretty significant preoccupied attachment. Online, you tend to see the word anxious attachment, which is fine. That's from the clinical literature. But really, all insecure attachment styles have anxiety in it. Like there's certain words because there's 4 attachment styles. And you'll see some authors that will say you have anxious, and then you have a different attachment style of fearful. Well, that's not easy to remember. Plus, anxious doesn't really describe it. Preoccupied is the best word to describe it because the person is preoccupied, they're hyper vigilant, and it implies anxiety, in my opinion. And instead of fearful, I'll use disorganized. And these are all words from the literature. They're just different language systems depending on the author and the researcher and the age group they're talking about. But I'll say disorganized. And then for avoidant, I'll use avoidant. Some people say dismissive. Some people say there's other labels. And then secure is always secure. Sometimes they'll say resolved for secure. Anyway, so I will say preoccupied attachment, and I will sometimes also talk about borderline. So let me be specific here. So basically, in order for me to fully describe where I'm coming from when I'm using all these labels, is you have to understand attachment theory sufficiently, which is not easy. It's taught in a very simplistic way, but when you really understand it, you really understand it. And then 2, you would have to understand personality disorders and borderline in particular. Those are very, very complicated things. And having a surface or an internet version of understanding of these 2 areas of research is not sufficient to really provide you with the foundation of where I'm coming from. But, in a nutshell, I will say that everyone, in my opinion, and a lot of experts will have this consensus as well, is that everyone with borderline personality disorder suffers from some sort of severe attachment insecurity. And the 2 that are, according to research, associated with borderline are disorganized and preoccupied. People with avoidant attachment style and secure attachment style don't tend to also have borderline personality disorder. In my personal experience, I've never met a client that had borderline and avoidant or borderline and secure attachment. And you can listen to all my episodes on that topic. It's kind of nuanced, and some people with preoccupied will say that they have bouts of avoidance, but that's not typically the way that I would conceptualize it. They might be avoiding relationships, but they don't have all of the hallmarks of an avoidant attachment style. They're very much incompatible, avoidant attachment style and borderline personality disorder. Could I be convinced? Maybe. It's possible. Or might someone weave in and out of things? I don't know. But for people with borderline, they will almost always, in my opinion, they always have either significant preoccupied attachment or significant disorganized. So for borderline people with preoccupied attachment style, they tend to pursue a lot and become emotionally displaying, they display emotions in a much bigger way. They feel emotions in a much bigger way. They tend to get more jealous. They tend to be more hypervigilant. And as they get close to their attachment figure, they will feel some level of soothing that will soothe them. And there'll be temporary reductions in distress. Whereas for people with borderline and with disorganized or fearful attachment style, these individuals experienced a much higher level of early mistreatment and abuse, in that as they were moving toward their caregivers, they were also being harmed and abused by their caregivers, which made the child at the age of 12 months and 24 months terrified. And children are programmed, seemingly, we have this instinct. A lot of animals that have a taking care of your young for, there's certain animals where they'll leave the eggs in the sand, like with a turtle, and the turtle emerges out of the egg and they never see their parent. They never see their mom. Whereas a lot of animals, like a lot of mammals also, but there's a lot of animals in the animal kingdom, including us, that have a period of time where we're taking care of our young, we're protecting them, we're feeding them, we're teaching them. And as with other animals that have that, there is clearly some sort of instinct that children will exhibit without being taught, where when they are experiencing danger, they run to their designated caregiver, usually the mother. Bears will do this. Cats, big cats will do this. So there's different variations of it, of course, but we clearly have that instinct. You'll see children do that without being taught how to do that. And so when the child is being abused by the parent and the child is afraid, they have an instinct to run to the parent, but they also have an instinct to run away from danger. Usually it would be like a common enough scenario is you have an 18-month-old child or a 24-month-old child, and you are going into a party, like a birthday party, you're bringing your kid, and your kid sees strangers, maybe even people that your kid knows, sort of, like aunts and uncles or something, but it can be overwhelming, and the child will hide in your skirt, right? Totally normal. You would hope that a child would do that to some extent. It can get kind of annoying at times because it's like, Auntie Carol, like you just spent all week last, like it's just Auntie Carol. But those are kids, and so you want to see that, and so when there's danger, then you run to the home base. But hopefully the danger is not the home base. But what if the danger is the home base? So you have this instinct to run away from the danger and run towards the home base, and the child is like, what do I do? Does not compute, and it will, in a metaphor, short circuit the brain and the instinct and the behavior, and the child will, they just don't know what to do. And usually when you have anxiety, we have something to do with our bodies and behavior, right? There's a danger, you scream, or you run away, or you fight, or you flight, or you freeze, or some kind of thing that you can do with yourself, It's why with like panic disorder, there often can just be this unnamed doom. That's how I experienced my panic attacks, was just utter, all-encompassing, just blinding terror and nothing to react to. Like there's nothing to run away from. There's nothing to run toward. It's just this state of fear, and the brain is feeling this doom. Sometimes with panic, people will identify like, I'm going to have a heart attack or I'm going to go crazy. But those are just like guesses. But really what's happening is this just almost biologically triggered anxiety attack. Anyway, so for the disorganized people with borderline, as they pursue and they get close, if they manage that, which is what they're seeking, which is what we're all seeking, they will also feel a tremendous amount of fear, increasingly so as they get closer. And they will have more paranoia as they get close because they feel afraid. So they start thinking, well, why do I feel afraid? And because they don't yet have insight as to why they have that fear, they figure it must be something that their partner is doing, and so they will become accusatory. You're abusing me, or you're going to leave me. The symptoms will be more distorted, more paranoid, and perhaps more problematic. You can have a preoccupied person with borderline that can be very, very problematic. It's hard to have a scale of this sort of thing. But like I said earlier, with preoccupied, the closer you get, there can be some temporary soothing. It's like, okay, I'm fine. When we observe children, when they're preoccupied, they go to their parent, because we observe this in the lab, and they will hold on to their parent and maybe get angry at their parent, like, how come you left me? Because they do these experiments, and the child will, in a very uncomplicated way, cling to the parent. They seem to be at least somewhat soothed by that. Whereas with kids with disorganized attachment, when they're reunited with their parent, the child will you can see, like, oh, you're here, parent. But they also have this massive terror as they move towards the parent. And you'll see various different glitches that the children will go through. Sometimes they'll just freeze or scream or run in a circle or just collapse or move toward while they're going, whereas preoccupied, they run and they cling. So with borderline, as an adult, it will have those kind of elements. And when I'm treating people with borderline who also have disorganized attachment, my hope is that I'm going to get them to a preoccupied place. I have no delusion that I'm going to have a disorganized borderline person as we're going through treatment. I don't think it's possible to go from disorganized to secure. So the best thing I can do as an interim step is that they go from disorganized to preoccupied, because at the very least with preoccupation, you have some way of coping. One way of thinking about it in attachment theory language is regarding working models. And as we are young, growing up, we are developing working models, our understanding, our givens that we take as a given regarding the views of the self and views of others. So when we, long story short, for preoccupied people as children and as adults, they have concluded that they are basically worthless. They aren't lovable. They aren't interesting or good enough. They're not worth it. They have very low self-esteem. But their working model of others it's complicated, but to some extent is preserved, because they have had enough experiences to believe that other people can be a good source of attachment safety and attachment satiation, that attunement and attachment is very sporadic, it tends to be. Like there might be abandonment or there might be flakiness on behalf of the parents. There's various different scenarios where this can result in that. But the child has not given up on other people. And they might be paranoid at times about the other, but that's their goal. If I can just get to others, then everything will be okay. Because I'm worthless and I don't have any inner reserves. I have no resilience. I have no worth. I have no skills. I have no abilities. I need others. So there can be a lot of dependence and a lot of focus on others. Okay. For people with disorganized, they have bad working models of self and other. They're being mistreated and they believe they're a terrible person. And because they're being mistreated in very overt ways, they conclude pretty early on that other people cannot be trusted. So other people are dangerous and other people are exploitative and other people cannot be trusted. And I am a horrible, worthless human being. With avoidant, they will conclude that other people can't be trusted. They're neglectful or harmful in some way, but they have a working model of self that is somewhat preserved. That's why they tend to be more narcissistic. They tend to be more self-reliant and pathologically independent. So for disorganized people, they have terrible working models of self and other based on a lot of experiences growing up that they apply to every situation, even though the situation they were in growing up was particular. They could be in a good relationship as an adult, and interpret everything as though bad things are happening. So for treatment to progress, I cannot expect that I'm going to rework both working models completely at the same pace. At the very least, what I can try to do, strangely, I guess I've never said this out loud, or even thought it really, that it's easier to change the working model of other than it is to change the working model of self in this weird, it's kind of weird to say that out loud, but I think anecdotally that's true. So I am hoping that I can get them to at least have an idea of other people as modeled by me, shown by me, their experiences with me, that they can trust other people, maybe. And then later I'm going to, I'm always working on their working model of self, but I suspect that will come along later. And I guess when I'm working through this, as I'm thinking out loud, that in order for them to believe that they're lovable, they have to experience a relationship in which they are loved. I will talk about this sometimes, that people will talk about self-esteem as though it's a decision you make. No. No one chooses to have good or bad self-esteem. Our self-esteem is based on how we're treated. When we're treated well, and our perspective and our own inner voice plays a role, but generally speaking, I have pretty good self-esteem. The reason why I do is because I was treated very well and have been treated very well by the loved people around me, by my loved ones, my parents, my family, my wife, my friends. And that makes me feel like I'm worth it, that I'm a good enough person. But other people, when they are treated not that way, they will conclude I am not a good person. So in order to correct for that, in order to have an increase in self-esteem, typically, in my experience, they have to have experiences with others that show them that they are worth it. They can't just overpower their associations and their working models. So in order for them to experience things that are telling them that they're worth it, they have to believe in other people, and that has to do with reworking that working model, that other people can be maybe trusted some of the time. And other people might be good if they pass these tests, maybe. And as I get them to trust me and believe that I am on their side and that I am non-exploitative, then I can begin to work on their self-esteem by treating them in a way that teaches them that they are worth it, and then they start. So, one has to come before the other. I haven't really thought this through, as you can tell. I'm just saying it off the top of my head, but I'm sure it's not all the time, but this does ring true, at least with borderline. Anyway, so when I talk on the show about, so the reverse is that not everyone who is preoccupied or disorganized has borderline. You can have no personality disorder if you're preoccupied or borderline, or you could have a different personality disorder. So everyone with borderline has one of those two attachment styles, in my experience, and research shows they are very highly correlated. But if you're preoccupied or disorganized, the chance of you also having borderline is not very high. They are associated. Your chance is much increased if you have significant preoccupied attachment or disorganized attachment, but that's how that works, if that makes sense. So you could have someone with, I could assess someone with, pretty severe preoccupied attachment, but I wouldn't characterize them as having borderline personality disorder because that's a very specific presentation, a very specific, set of symptoms and presentations and schemas. For example, if someone came to me and they were very, very preoccupied, say, similar to the way Chelsea presents, and I found that they had a pretty good sense of their emotions and who they were in touch with the self, they had pretty good self-identity, at least enough, then I would say, well, they don't fit the main criteria set for borderline, because for people with borderline, they don't have a sense of who they are. In fact, when they look at themselves, they feel very empty. That's a hallmark. It's a hallmark of a lot of personality disorders. But so if someone was very preoccupied, very jealous, very hypervigilant, very other-focused, and yet they also had a pretty good sense of who they were and what their needs were, then I would say, well, definitely preoccupied, but they don't have borderline personality disorder or histrionic or anything like that. So there's that. Now, if someone had disorganized attachment, the chance that they didn't suffer at least from one of the personality disorders that I have on my list, because some of those are not in the DSM, is pretty slim. Either if I did conceptualize someone as having disorganized and no personality disorder, then they either have a low-grade version of disorganized attachment, or they've been through a fair amount of treatment and the schemas are no longer there, but the core of disorganized attachment is still there. So I don't know where I was going with that sentence, but I think that's where I'll end it. Because I was like either dink, and I thought, is there, anyway, you get my point, I hope. And so when I am talking about people in these reaction videos, and really when I'm talking with colleagues and students and whatnot, I will sometimes throw out, you'll hear me say codependent overfunctioning. You'll hear me use those terms. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to emphasize what I'm talking about when I say codependent is not what the internet says, but I'm talking about the overfunctioning aspect. And with codependent people, they're always overfunctioning in some way. There's different ways to manifest that, but they're always overfunctioning. But not all overfunctioners are codependent. I've been over that already. So everyone with borderline has some version of insecure attachment, but not everyone with insecure attachment has borderline. And so when I'm talking about borderline, I'm talking about preoccupation, I tend to throw those in together to emphasize with borderline, I'm talking about the preoccupation that is what I believe to be the hallmark, the abandoning aspect. Because when you use the term borderline on the internet, or even in my field, like if I went to a lecture and someone was talking about borderline, if they didn't clearly define what they were talking about, how they were defining borderline, I wouldn't know how they were exactly defining it. If they threw in the word preoccupation or disorganized, but particularly preoccupation or jealousy or something like that, or pursuer distancer, I would go, oh, okay, I know the definition. I think I know the definition. So that's why I'm saying that. The other reason with Chelsea is that borderline is particular, as I've been talking thus far. Preoccupation is easier to identify quickly. I would need a lot more information to hypothesize around borderline. There were data that were in that direction that I did highlight, right? But I would feel much more confident going with an initial hypothesis of preoccupation than borderline. I've talked about how with personality disorders, I have the luxury of doing this, and I will wait months before I actually, in the file, say borderline personality disorder, or even firmly in my head conceptualize someone with that, because I need to have a lot of experience. I need to see it from a lot of angles. I might be seeing this person in a particular, if someone with, they didn't have borderline, but they did have preoccupation, and they're going through a particularly hard time in their life, they might present kind of like someone with borderline. I wouldn't know yet. So I need more time to see them in more context. I also need to evaluate a lot more countertransference and how they react to me, the distortions element, that kind of thing. So I hope that makes sense. That's my in a nutshell. So imagine not in a nutshell. All right, let's move on with some more emails. And by the way, the comments, the emails really make me feel like we're having a conversation instead of me just lecturing. As a professor, I hated just lecturing. I, as a graduate student, hated it when professors approached class time that way. It makes it boring. It also requires the professor to be extremely entertaining, basically so entertaining that you can just sit there for hours and just watch them. Whereas as for myself, I didn't want to have to rely on that. I wanted people to, I found that there's different modes that you enter into as a listener, as a student. Maybe some of you might be able to relate to this, that when we are listening to somebody, I think there's sort of an egg timer on how long we can sustain that. And once that egg timer has, ended, once the ding happens, our brain starts to turn off and we glaze over. I would notice that with students sometimes. So you have to alternate between absorbing and processing and doing. So with students, I learned, and I took teaching very, very seriously. And I also took no classes and read no books on how to teach, which is common for professors. If you're a high school teacher, you by definition, unless you're at a private school, I think, but maybe that's not true. But anyway, public schools with teachers, you by definition have taken classes on how to teach, right? But somehow when it comes to graduate school, which arguably, well, at the very least, it's just as difficult, right? There's just as many issues that go into it, just as many skills. And yet professors aren't expected to take any courses on, not even one. I literally have never taken a single course. I've not read a single book. I've read articles maybe, but anyway, through trial and error, and just really paying attention and really being dedicated. And also as a graduate student myself going, oh, I don't like this. I'm never gonna do this thing. It's why I never used a PowerPoint, or I very rarely would use a PowerPoint. Anyway, so I also, when I was coming up as a professor, PowerPoint didn't exist in the 90s. So I had to rely on other things. Anyway, I would learn that I would lecture for a bit, and then I would either have them think on their own or talk with a partner or do something with it, like apply or conceptualize or get up and move around or do a demonstration where they're the therapist or whatever. And if I alternated, because at Antioch, our classes are 3 hours long. So I would have, 10, 15 students for 3 hours, sometimes from 7 p.m. till 10 p.m. When I was an adjunct and not high ranking, I was the lowest rank, and I would be given the terrible shifts. The senior professors didn't want to teach at 7 p.m. or until 10 p.m. And so I learned very quickly how to do that. And so but it takes planning, it takes creativity, it takes experience to know what sort of activities to do. Anyway, so when y'all comment and email in, it feels like it did when I was a professor, and there would be, a back and forth, and it shows that you're engaging in it. That's, as a professor, you're always looking for that. You're looking for people to go, let me try that one on for something. I don't know about that one. I think that is in line with this other thing. Ooh, I'm making a connection. I'm getting chills thinking about just how wonderful it is to be a part of that process as a professor. But anyway, so thanks for your emails. Very, very intelligent and thoughtful and healthy. A lot of healthy people saying like, ooh, I think I'm kind of like Chelsea and I need to work on that. It's very healthy to recognize that in yourself and have the self-compassion. Anyway, so anonymous YouTube member, they say, my partner will sometimes accuse me of being abusive. My partner will sometimes accuse me of being abusive or even suggest that I have borderline. But she is the one who has been diagnosed with borderline. My partner will sometimes accuse me of being abusive or even suggest that I have borderline, but she is the one who has been diagnosed with borderline. She also accuses me of abusive behavior. For example, she recently heard that it's abusive to threaten to break up with someone. Now, whenever she displays abusive behavior and I tell her that this isn't working, she accuses me of abuse. Is she right? And how do I address this? I find myself in a cycle of coming back to her after promises of change. But then ready to leave after those promises are quickly broken after a week or so. End of email. Yeah, lots to say here, but I'll address the first thing, that the threatening to break up. Yeah, it can be a part. This is the problem with the internet, is that they'll identify a thing and say, that's always abusive. It's not always abusive. I mean, there are certain things that are always abusive, like striking your partner across the face. But even then, there's probably like, like if your partner was about to throw your child off a bridge or something and you thought the only way to get them to stop was to punch them in the face, would you say that's a part of a cycle of abuse? I wouldn't, given the way I described it, but that's pretty silly of a weird example. But threatening to break up with someone can be abusive if it's evaluated as such, as part of an overall pattern, like that you have a victim who either started out or has been made to feel very dependent on their abusive partner. And the abusive partner will say, I will break up with you if you don't stop blah, blah, blah. If you disrespect me again by talking with that sister of yours who's against me, I'm going to divorce you. And a part of the implication is, I'm going to get my lawyers to attack you. I'm going to, rip the children away from you. It's not just breaking up. It often will come with it a lot of other things. Or I will leave you, or at least I will want to leave you, which will make me turn on you and the abuse could get worse. There's a lot of potential implications there. But anyway, yeah, so that's abusive. But just threatening to break up with someone, and plus, what's threatening exactly? Is it threatening or is it just alerting? Because what you're saying is that you're being abused, and then it gets to a point where you say, if this doesn't stop, I don't know if I can be in this relationship anymore. Is that threatening? I suppose. But is it abusive? No. You're the victim, and you're making a choice. And just because the abusive person, who almost always does even believe it, but at the very least they will frame any movement against them as being abusive to them, is, it's absurd. So now, I don't know, anonymous YouTube member, you might be abusive to your partner. I can't know. If your partner were to email in, I might conclude that you're the abusive person. I might hear a similar kind of thing. So I don't know. But based on your description, it sounds like you're the victim and you are alerting your partner. You're trying to get them to change. Like if you said, hey, and if this abuse doesn't stop, I can't be in this relationship anymore. I'm sorry. I want to be in the relationship, but I can't. This is too painful for me. I don't deserve this. And as a part of this, if you really want to keep me around, then, which I want to do, I want you to do these things. I want to be in a relationship with you. Then you would go to therapy. You would work on these things, whatever. But if you don't, within X amount of time, then I'm gone. That's a good thing. Now, you could also just leave if you want to, but that would be healthy and reasonable. And to frame it as you're being abusive because you're, it doesn't make any sense. And then you say, now whenever she displays abusive behavior and I tell her this isn't working, she accuses me of abuse. Is she right? Is she right? I don't know, but she could be wrong. And how do I address this? How do you address it? Well, as I was talking about with the previous video in which I was going over comments, there was someone looking back on an abusive relationship that they were in, I think for like 15 years. And they're in that process of, like, how do I solve this problem? I'm being treated a certain way, or my behavior is triggering my partner, and then they're abusing me. What's the solution? And depending, it's complicated. Every situation is different, but often there is no solution that the victim can engage in to solve the problem, because the problem is outside of the behavior and outside of the victim's personality, because they have a baseline of feeling insecure and feeling jealous and feeling attachment insecurity and feeling like abandonment is around every corner. And there's nothing you can do to take that away. If there was, there would be no need for therapy, right? If you could somehow play your cards right and solve that insecurity that they had in to 1,000,000,000% before they even met you. If you could just play the game right and it would fix their problem, then I would be recommending that for people. I mean, there is something about earned security, but in the way that I'm framing it in terms of abuse and pre-insight, there's no solution that a victim can engage in. But that's the message that's given to them by society and maybe by parents. It's certainly the message given to them by the abuser, that if you just did this and this and this differently, then everything would go okay. But that's not what happens, because when you accommodate, though, there might be temporary soothing that will happen, but the insecurity and the attachment insecurity and all the schemas and all the difficulties continue, and it will just continue to be felt by the abusive person, and then they just look for something to point at, and they point at a new thing that you're doing, and your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. The way that this is usually described on the internet regarding abuse is that the person is setting out to isolate you completely. And certainly there are abusive people like that. But the vast majority of perpetrators that I treated, both in mandated DV programs and also in my office, just outside of that, they are trying to solve a problem that they're feeling ongoing, this insecurity and this jealousy and this attachment loss. They're feeling that feeling and they're trying to solve it. And so they just look for something in their partner, maybe what kind of was the last straw on the camel's back or the thing that triggered them. And they try to change that. And that's the abusive coping mechanism, is control. And so if they can get control, they'll feel some soothing because it feels good to have some power over somebody, particularly the person that you're trying to. All of us want power to some extent over our partners, not in the abusive sense, but like I want to have the power to be able to tell my wife that she hurt my feelings and have her listen. I want to have the power to get her to listen to me, right? I don't have the right to make her listen to me, but I want to have that sense of control and power and agency to say something and have her listen to me, right? And I might have to even say, hey, could you put that book down? Or hey, could you turn off the TV? Or hey, could you take a second and sit down with me? I'm asking for a favor, and I want the power to be able to say that, and at least most of the time have her comply or oblige me, and vice versa, right? That's power is not a bad thing. Power is a good thing. Healthy power is a wonderful thing. We want the power to vote for our politicians. We want the power to be able to ambulate to the store if we want to. We want the power to be able to save a little bit of money so we're not living paycheck to paycheck. Power is a good thing. So with these individuals that are abusive, they're having this problem and they are trying to get power, and they get a little bit of power. It makes them feel a little soothed. Also, their trigger cognitively feels like, okay, we're good now. I won't get triggered anymore. But the feeling will persist because they have not received treatment. And so they will once again turn to their Rolodex of options. Power is the only thing in the Rolodex, and then they will exert that power, get control, they'll get a little bit of soothing. And over time, the isolation and the control and the gaslighting and the brainwashing have this progressive effect on the victim. So this question from you, anonymous YouTube member, how do I address this? You're faced with a lot of bad options. You're just choosing from the less of several evils. What I recommend is that you start a journey of protecting yourself, whatever that looks like. It's easier said than done, but obviously talking to a therapist and maybe a DV advocate of some sort, calling the domestic violence hotline, starting there, looking at some pamphlets or reading some stuff online, is a part of that journey. It takes a long time, but you deserve not to be abused. And trying to argue or trying to make your case, if in fact you are being abusive, or if in fact you are being abused, trying to make your case to an abusive person is just not going to work typically. It's like, how do I say? It's like, hey, I'm not threatening to break up with you in an abusive way. I'm just alerting you to how if you don't stop abusing me, then I might want to leave. The way you word it, it's like, hey, this isn't working. This relationship isn't working. You're not even, that often is a softer way. It's a message, but the hope of how do I get through to them? There's strategies you can do, but I wouldn't expect them to work consistently or enough. And two, I wouldn't expect people to be able to hold the line. For myself, since I know this forwards and backwards, I believe that I would have an approach that wouldn't necessarily work, but I would be confident that I'm doing everything I can before I leave, that kind of thing. But anyway, so there's that. And you say, I find myself in a cycle of coming back to her after promises of change, but then ready to leave after those promises are quickly broken after a week or so. Yeah. So another way to look at this, it's not always the case, is that instead of seeing it as like they're making promises and then breaking them, another way of looking at it is they want to follow the promises. When they are making those promises, they might actually be hoping that to be true, and they don't want to lose you, and they might even somewhat recognize that they're part of the problem. So they are making those promises. But then, because all of that trauma that they had long before they ever met you is carried through, and they aren't getting treatment, then there will be a trigger, and they will be overwhelmed, and they will resort to their Rolodex, which only has control in there, and they will be breaking their promises, and they might even know it in the moment, and they will justify it in their mind. Well, this time's different because I'm only doing it because he did this thing or they did this thing. So it's not a voluntary process for the abusive person, and if you understand that, then you also understand that you can't deal with them because they aren't dealing with themselves. They're not in control of themselves. So how could you have control over them? It's just, similar to addiction. This isn't always the case, but it often is. All right, this next email is from an anonymous listener. She says, it was so interesting to watch these videos, and it made me realize my mom has a lot of borderline qualities. In the series, you talk mostly about romantic relationships with someone with borderline. Can you talk a bit about how it would look if your mother had borderline, ways to have a healthy relationship with a parent on the borderline spectrum, and how to handle situations where your mom is triggered and not seeing reality clearly? End of email. Yeah, well, all the same principles apply. The same reactivity can apply. It can look different because typically if you're an adult, you don't live with your parents, or at the very least, you're not as tied together emotionally and in terms of your life. So it can more often look like when you do have contact with your mother, that's when something happens and then you retract. Typically in an intimate partner violence relationship, you won't have the victim have the ability to just say, I'm not going to answer their text for a while, or typically that. Now, can a mother or a parent take issue with that? Can there be enmeshments and an expectation of constant communication? Absolutely, especially if the borderline parent has identified and relied on you for that closeness throughout your life. But anyway, so all the same things apply. It would just look a little different. Instead of being jealous of infidelity, it would be like jealous of your time, that kind of thing. Ways to have a healthy relationship with a parent on the borderline spectrum. Again, you're choosing from several evils. So if someone legit has borderline, meaning that they are pretty high in the spectrum of these issues, I will say that if someone is subclinical, meaning they don't qualify for the disorder, I would still say they have borderline personality because that's where the disorder language comes from. The DSM did not invent borderline. Borderline was observed and researched and talked about and written about long before the DSM first version was ever published. So the DSM is just trying to codify what was already happening in the field. Anyway, so if someone's pretty significant on the spectrum, can you have and what's a healthy relationship? Generally speaking, it's about boundaries and limitations and having knowledge that they might get triggered, and it doesn't have to do with you. You don't take it personally. Setting expectations. You can certainly go to your mom and say, hey, I don't know what's going on in our relationship, and I don't know if it's your fault or my fault or our fault, but I would like to have a close relationship with you, and that means that I would like to kind of change these aspects of it, where this and this and this happen. So if we could modify that, then I think this could be an even better relationship than we have already, or something like that. And then how to handle situations when your mom is triggered and not seeing reality clearly. I don't know. It would be a case by case. Every situation is different. But one solution that people will develop, and it's not a great one, but they will just have a pattern of drawing a boundary and maybe even say it explicitly. You just say to your mom, so I've been in this situation many times, Mom, but I think that you are in a state of being triggered by something. I don't know if something's happening regarding the traumas you went through with your parents or something, but something's happening. And I feel like when you're in this state, it's hard to reason with you. And I'm just going to draw a boundary at this point. And I'm sorry. I'm not abandoning you. I'm not leaving you. I'm just taking a little bit of break and hope that you can figure out a way to cope somehow. And I'm guessing this isn't going to go over well, but when you recover, because that's usually what I observe, I still love you. I'm still here. And the mom yells and screams, and you're like, okay, well, I look forward to reconnecting with you once you have coped in the way that I typically will see you do. Mom yells at you, and then you hang up. And then, a couple weeks later, you do your little litmus test. She seems to have recovered. And, you just develop this pattern. And over time, she might even just recognize in herself. I had a friend like this, actually, that over time, he didn't have borderline, but, he had similar issues. And he, over time, learned, oh, I just crossed the line. And he would actually draw the boundary himself. Because the first number of times it happened, to be specific, I was not the target. I was not the victim. I was watching him victimize another person. And I, as a clinician, saw it for what it was and said, if he targets me, even 1% what he's doing to the other person, I'm gone, because I know what's happening and there's no solution to that. So I only live life once, and this relationship is good, but it's not that good. So when he turned on me, then, even it was slight, and I was like, yep, I made this decision months ago, I'm out. And long story short, he ends up begging to re-engage, and I was basically saying no, because I just knew what was going to happen. But long story short, basically, he convinces me, and so we continue, and I'm thinking, it's going to happen again. I mean, that's kind of the thing when you're a clinician and you have experience and wisdom around these kinds of issues. Once you see the hallmarks, you see it for what it is. And I'm sure there are a lot of professions like that, right? Politicians or physicians or journalists or whatever, plumbers. You see the typical games that people will play with themselves that are understandable, but when you know what, when you have expertise, you're just like, nah, there's no. It's sort of like I imagined with plumbing. Someone will have some plumbing problem in their house, and they'll go to a plumber, and the plumber will say, yeah, well, that's going to be a few $1,000s, and then the homeowner's like, oof, I don't know, that's a lot of money. And then the homeowner's like, oh, is there a way I could fix that on my own? And the plumber just knows, like, don't go down that road. Because even if I told you, and I'd be happy to give you some advice, some YouTube channels to watch, 99% of the time, you will have wished that you just, paid for someone to fix it. You don't have to hire me, but you need a professional, because what you're dealing with is bigger, and by the time you learn all the things you need to learn, it'll be years in the future, and you'll cause more problems that will, I don't know if that's true about plumbing, but so when I see that sort of thing happening, I'm just like, don't, in your mind, I'm telling it to myself, don't justify it. Don't look for a way to fix it or deal with it. Like, don't tell yourself, I can deal with it. Or maybe if I draw a boundary or I tell him, he'll relearn and it won't happen again. Now, I'm not saying I do this with all friends. In fact, it would be a very small minority. It's just those people that I'm like, oh, this is something about their character, their personality. This is pervasive. This is a perceptual distortion that is not alterable, even if the individual wants to alter it. Even if they enter therapy tomorrow, it'll be years before that is altered. So they're going to do this again. They're going to have that reaction again, and I'm going to get targeted again, and it'll be worse, because that's just how these things go. So anyway, re-engaged, and it happened again. And before I could draw, as soon as it happened, I'm like, oh, all right, that's it. We're done. We're not only done, but we're over, because he was on probation to begin with. And then he says, before I could even say that, there's a lot of details here, but he tells me that he's going to draw the boundary that I was going to draw. He's like, oh, I did it again, and I know what you're going to do, so I'll just do that, and that's that. And I was like, thanks. And I didn't feel bad at all. I did not feel bad. I felt good. I felt good that I could protect myself. I felt good that I saw it. I'm not happy that it happened again, but I'm like, I knew it was, and so it makes me feel good to take care of myself as a type of. So, anonymous listener, is that the thing to do? I have no idea. There's a lot of other options, but that is an option. It's hard, right? It's your mom, maybe some interim or some modified version of that where, like I said earlier, you draw boundaries under certain circumstances. I don't know. You can certainly suggest go to therapy. You can suggest go to family therapy, the two of you. There's a lot of options. Typically, those options don't really work because she wouldn't want to go. But anyway, anonymous listener says, I'm watching your recent episodes on borderline, and it made me realize I might be on the spectrum. I actually have been in therapy since I was 18, and I'm turning 30 right now. And all these years, I have been with the same therapist. Okay, so she's saying, actually, I think I might have borderline. And I've been in therapy for 12 years with the same therapist. We have talked about my issues, my oversensitivity, and my distortions. It always hurts me to listen to her since I feel like she's criticizing me. So just chiming in here, that's a very common feeling, if not universal, for people with borderline. Any indication of abandonment and attachment loss and rejection is very hurtful and terrifying because of the traumas that they went through. And when anybody experiences criticism, even if it's small, there is an element of rejection, and there is a slight chance of being abandoned because the person is saying, I don't like this about you, or I'd like you to change this. It's rational to conclude, if I don't change this, the person might leave me. We usually blow this way out of proportion, but it's not irrational to conclude that it's a possibility. So when someone with borderline, pre-insight, pre-treatment, receives anything close to a criticism, even if no one from the outside would call it that, like a common example of this is I'll be working with a borderline client and I will say something like, they'll be telling me about a fight that they got into the previous day, and I'll support them and I'll validate them, even though in my mind I'm thinking, there's a good chance there's some distortion going on there on my client's behalf. It could be even so severe that everything the client is saying is a distortion and their memories are distorted. Think about when Chelsea was saying, I knew Jess was there, and all the things she was rattling off. Those were breaks from reality or lies or something. And so for the client, I will, because that's the approach that I have and a lot of other experts as well, that you don't question it up front. There's time for that, or you have to make sure you have a good enough relationship, or the borderline person can handle that kind of feedback. But anyway, so I get all that, and let's say after I validate and hear and listen and process, maybe even a few sessions down the road, and I say, so I just want to revisit that one event you talked about, and although I'm fully in support of your emotions and I believe what you're saying, I just want to raise the possibility that there might have been something that you did that contributed to the problem. I don't know. I'm not saying that, I'm not blaming the victim, but just throwing it out there. Now, with other clients who don't have these sensitivities, they will be able to handle that kind of question, and they will be able to modify or handle or use their executive function to cope with the slight bit of rejection that they might be feeling on the inside. Now, some clients might even invite that, like, oh, I like that question. Thank you. I like it. So it's not everybody, but for people with borderline, because of their trauma regarding abandonment, anything even slightly resembling a move towards abandonment is felt as so painful and so anxiety provoking that it triggers them, and then they will react very poorly against the criticism. So for anonymous listener, I think what she's saying is, we talk about my oversensitivity and my distortions, and it always hurts me to listen to my therapist talk about these things because it feels like criticism. Yeah. I want to do my best to improve, but thinking about my reality being distorted makes me sick. I want to do my best to improve. Yeah. You're in therapy, so clearly. But when I think about my reality being distorted, I feel sick. Yeah. It's awful. There's so many layers to the awfulness that maybe I hadn't emphasized in the episodes. That one, if that's true, then it's terrifying to think that your version of reality isn't real. It's really scary. Then you start thinking, is anything that I believe true? It's really scary. It can have a self-gaslighting effect, but it's necessary. And when I'm there with clients as they go through that, I will ground them by saying, well, let's do some pretty broad evaluation of your understanding of how the world works and your memories before we move forward. You're distorted typically only about things that are happening while you are being triggered or what triggered you. So when you're baseline and you're not being triggered and everything is basically fine, even though you're suffering pretty much nonstop to some degree, those moments are probably processed and remembered in the typical way. You might misremember bits and pieces, but generally speaking, it's probably reflective of reality. But when you are triggered, then it's almost guaranteed that you are going to distort and misremember. You're going to encode incorrectly. You're going to remember incorrectly. For everyone, when they go through huge emotional experiences, it'll affect that. And for people with borderline, they can have very, very big emotional experiences, and they're happening more often. So the opportunity. So it's just those moments. It's not the way your brain works. It's the way all of our brains work when we have severe emotion, and people with borderline have severe emotion. and very acute spikes. And so, you can trust your brain. But anyway, it can make you sick on that level. It can make you sick on the level of how many people have I harmed through my distortions? It can make you sick. And yeah, that's kind of a grieving process. And as a therapist, I don't sugarcoat that. I don't hit people over the head with it. But if someone is realizing that, that's an appropriate feeling. It's a healthy feeling. It's a compassionate feeling. It's a necessary feeling to have, that all people with borderline will experience to some degree at some point. In order for people with borderline to get better, they have to recognize that they have borderline or something, whether you frame it as borderline or just having an oversensitivity or distorted under pressure situations. The reality is that, well, therefore, there have been moments when you've been oversensitive and distorted, and therefore you have been unfair to other people. And therefore you feel guilty and you feel bad. That is necessary. And me trying to protect a client from that, it just makes me look like I don't trust that the client can handle it, because they typically can. And also, it undermines my credibility as a therapist if I just say, no, everything's fine. You never, and it comes from a place of anxiety on my part. It's not helpful. I'll modify it by saying, it's not your fault that you have these issues. It's someone else's fault. So, yeah, you did these things, but what else could you have done given the way that your brain was processing those things? Now you know. So the only thing you should feel guilty about is if from this point forward you don't do what you can within reason to fix this problem. Then you should feel guilty. But up until this point, how could you have known? Anyway, so then you say, sometimes I feel paranoid that she might be actually gaslighting me into believing my perception is wrong and just wants me to be there for the permanent money. Yeah, so one, maybe that is happening. I don't know, but not likely. And the paranoia that you have that might be related to having been exploited as a child, you have this working model of others, particularly attachment figures, that they're going to exploit you or they are exploiting you somehow. And as a therapist is trying to be helpful, and the fact that you're even with the therapist for 12 years means that the therapist is doing something right. Because if you are on the spectrum of borderline, the fact that you haven't blown out of therapy means that the therapist is very adept at being able to help you to feel safe, especially in the face of being criticized. So there must be a lot of attachment security that the therapist has cultivated. And you've participated too. You've allowed that to happen and participated too. But anyway, so if we go with that it is a good relationship and your therapist isn't gaslighting you, it feels that way because, you were mistreated. And then you think like, well, she's telling me that I'm oversensitive or that I am overreactive or I'm distorted. And so normally attachment figures are trying to get me. So she's trying to get me and she's gaslighting me. And there are times when I believe her, but then I'm like, no, I didn't do that. And that's when it can cause people to blow out of therapy, and then no help is being given at that point. And then you say that, it's wrong and that I'm only there because she wants money. And that is almost universal, if not universal, feeling that clients will have as they're going through borderline treatment. It won't always manifest in this way specifically, but every borderline client, in fact, I consider it to be a marker of success that we have graduated to that phase of therapy for someone with borderline. I don't know if it happens all the time. It kind of depends on the degree of borderline, but for severe borderline, I would say anecdotally off the top of my head, it's always happened where the client will become convinced that I don't actually care about them, right? Because that was demonstrated to them growing up and they're having all that transference with me. And so particularly in between sessions, they will become more and more convinced that I don't care about them. And usually the phrase I hear is, that I secretly want to terminate with them, that I don't want to work with them anymore. And although therapy can be very difficult, the job can be very hard and very stressful, I am 100% sure that I want to be working with this client. Part of me and my body and my distress might be wanting to run out of the room and never be a therapist again. Therapists that work with people with borderline, I would say universally have those experiences sometimes. But as I was talking about, in the videos, I am a huge part of the purpose of my life is being satisfied by engaging in that struggle to help someone in this situation, particularly since they're often rejected so often by even clinicians. So I'm not there just for the money. Sometimes I'm doing pro bono work with clients like this. So you're having, I think, a very common transference and paranoia that you're framing as being paranoid, so you're aware of it, which is great. Going on with your email, you say, she doesn't believe in diagnosing, so we only talk about the characteristics of my personality. I have thought it might be useful to actually give a name to whatever is wrong in me. Watching your videos on borderline has resonated with me. It has helped me to feel understood and less overwhelmed. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, just chiming in. I mean, I don't know what your therapist actually holds to, but you're framing it as that she doesn't believe in diagnosing. If a client or if a therapist told me this, and occasionally therapists will, and if I'm in a position of collegial closeness or power, because I supervise people like this too, I will say, what do you mean by you don't believe in diagnosing? Because often that phrase is associated with a very rudimentary understanding. For some, not all, but, and there are legit philosophies that are in my field that will eschew all labeling and diagnosing. So-called postmodern therapies, narrative and solution-focused, and other kinds of brief therapies, collaborative therapies. They don't always just completely reject the whole thing, but they will say it's not useful given my model of therapy. And that's all legit. But there's a number of other people that have been brainwashed to believe that diagnosing is somehow always a problem, or it's over pathologizing, or there's too much stigma. People will sometimes email in, and I've certainly heard this from colleagues that will say, I don't believe in the word borderline. I don't use that. And when I ask why, they will say, well, because there's so much stigma. That'd be like saying that we want to do away with, being a black person because there's racism. We don't want to eliminate the notion that black people exist, or we don't want to take away black people's identity, right, and their experience just because people are racist against black people. Just because assholes are discriminatory towards people with borderline and will stigmatize them and will be wrong about them, including clinicians, it doesn't mean we just get rid of the concept. I suppose if we want to, we could have a new name for it, but that just seems kind of silly because why would we change the word for the assholes? The assholes are being assholes. The experts on borderline have never stigmatized it, have never said that it's insurmountable, have never judged people with borderline. That's on the outside, and those are idiot clinicians. And why should we change our language around that, right? So, and particularly just throughout the whole concept. And this idea that, because, these diagnoses, they don't just come out of thin air. There's not someone that just makes them up. These are concepts of personality that have existed for over 100 years and have been written about and thought about and researched and furthered and refined and wrestled with. And along the way, there have been many debates as to whether or not it's a real thing, or is personality a real thing, or are disorders a real thing? Should we be a philosophical field? Why are we medicalized? What do we, just thousands and thousands of people talking for millions and millions of hours and putting millions of words to the page and debating and thinking about it. And after all of that, the consensus is, yes, borderline personality disorder is a thing. And for someone, especially like fresh out of graduate school, to say like, yeah, I reject that entire thing. I know this much about it, and I have decided that that whole thing is stupid. Wow. I mean, the narcissism, truly, the arrogance to believe, and I've seen it before. And so there's that reason, arrogance. Two, the other reason that I'll see is that you'll have clinicians that are insecure about their diagnosing ability, and they hear someone else say that they don't believe in diagnosing, and they're, oh, well, that would solve my problem, either subconsciously or consciously. They think, well, if I don't believe in diagnosing, then I don't have to diagnose and I don't have to learn it. Now, as I've said many times, this doesn't mean you have to hold the line regarding the mainstream understanding of borderline. You can have modifications to it. I do, actually. You also don't have to use that language all the time. I actually typically, with clients, particularly in the beginning, and even on this channel, I won't use the word borderline because it does carry with it so many associations that I don't want to have involved. And if I don't have the time to dismantle that whole thing, I'll just phrase it differently, because the other phrases that I use are totally applicable, and it's not a euphemism. It's maybe a more accurate phrase. Like I will say relationally traumatized. You'll hear me say that. That's not always borderline, but I might say relationally traumatized with abandonment schema, or that kind of thing. Those phrases are much more descriptive and much more accurate and much more communicative as to what's going on in my mind. When I say borderline, I'm referring to that, but I don't know if the person receiving that is going to hear it that way. And when I talk to clients, I don't say, oh, by the way, you have borderline. No, we talk for a long time about their schemas and about their experiences and attunement and their reactivity. You know, typically long before I introduce the word borderline to them, they understand borderline personality disorder forwards and backwards because I've explained it to them in layperson's terms. Then by the time, at some point, I will introduce that for various different reasons. I want them to know what's in my head. It's also in their file, potentially. Also, there are resources, like if they went to DBT, for example, they will talk about borderline typically. I want them to have a language that they can communicate with other people. If they find someone that says they're borderline, they could say, oh yeah, that's what I have too, or whatever. So by the time I introduce that to them, they will understand what borderline is. I don't just say, yeah, borderline. I mean, maybe there were times when I would, but I wouldn't just say that. I would explain. And I also would always say, by the way, 95% of the discourse online, even among clinicians around borderline personality disorder, is false and stupid. So don't, so be aware of that when you Google it or go online. But there are places, even on Reddit, you'll find subreddits that have a lot of really good information, a lot of good support around that sort of thing. I'm not saying that as a blanket statement, of course. But so anyway, getting to your email, you're saying that your therapist doesn't believe in diagnosing, so we only talk about the characteristics of my personality, which is fine. What's the difference? I mean, it sounds like your therapist either is knowingly treating borderline or is eschewing that whole system and is operating from a system of schemas or of complexes or something. It doesn't matter what word we put to it. In a lot of ways, the word borderline is silly, as I talked about, I believe, in all the different parts, that if I could go back in time and tell the original authors of that terminology, I would explain to them what actually will be found later on, and I would discuss with them around what label to put to it, because borderline stuck in the beginning because it was this early observation of these sorts of patients because they were borderline schizophrenic, right? But that highlights a very narrow point of view of the disorder. Today, I would imagine that we would label it differently. We would probably say like abandonment trauma personality, or abandonment betrayal, maybe betrayal is even a broader term, because if you're abandoned, you feel betrayed. So I guess I would call it betrayal sensitivity personality disorder. I think that's fine. But the notion of these diagnoses to eschew that is either arrogant or a convenient way of not learning new things, or you've been brainwashed or something. But anyway, it sounds like your therapist is, regardless, treating you in a way that's going to help. I can't tell, of course, but it sounds that way. And you're saying that when I talk about borderline and you're thinking, oh, that kind of sounds like what I have. I've asked my therapist to give me some sort of label and my therapist refuses. It's kind of nice to get from you, Kirk, this label, because it feels like, oh, this is like a thing. It's not just this amorphous, unique issue that I have. It's like this. There's a whole history there. There's other people like me. That's how labels can be powerful. Labels can harm and can benefit. When people find out, they have all these physical ailments and then they're given a diagnosis of fibromyalgia or thyroid issues or dietary issues or IBS, whatever. For most people, they will, even though the label can carry with it a lot of consequences that, like, it doesn't respond well to treatments or whatever and has a progressive course to it where things get worse over time, there can be a lot of grief around that and sadness. But for a lot of people, they're like, okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm not this crazy one-man show regarding this presentation. And two, there's a lot of research that I can start looking up. I have at least a direction to look at literature. Three, it gives some direction to treatment when you know what's wrong, right? Now, your therapist has identified the issues. And it's possible that when you ask direct questions like, what's wrong with me? Your therapist is careful to say, there's nothing wrong with you, but you do have these issues occasionally with being oversensitive and distorting and that sort of thing. Because your therapist doesn't want you thinking and knows that if you go down that road of there's something wrong with me, then that will cause more issues for you. That those words or, what's the diagnosis, that kind of language can be harmful to some clients, particularly if the therapist isn't really comfortable with that language. I'm so comfortable with personality disorder language that I think it's felt as I word it. You might even feel it when I talk about it in these videos. But when I am having those conversations with clients, I've never had a negative reaction from clients when I tell them about borderline, because it's when I talk about that, it's presented as it's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something scary. It's not something that I'm scared of. It's fine. I've helped a lot of people with borderline, and all the things we've been talking about already. If you want to know the clinical term, it's called borderline personality. I could tell you the history. I could tell you the research. I could tell you my approach. I could tell you the hallmarks. Everyone's unique. You're a unique person. But this is the umbrella thing, and this is where we're headed. That's a snapshot, but that kind of talk, I think, just doesn't cause people to get anxious about that label. And for a lot of clients, they'll tell me, "Oh, thank you for sharing that with me. I had a previous therapist that I think was actually thinking this, but never told me." We don't know why the previous therapist didn't say, but it's possible the therapist was afraid or didn't know how to explain it, or was worried about being sued, or I don't know. But you're saying that having this label makes you feel understood and less overwhelmed. And now, the label itself doesn't cause that. It's probably 99% all the other things that I'm talking about. But to have something to Google, to have a direction to go in, to find forums like on Reddit or something to evaluate whether or not these support systems can be helpful, that word helps. And it helps me as a clinician, when I have these kind of words, when I have this language, and I have those places that I can look to as well. What key word do I put into, like with psychological literature, if I put oversensitive, I would not get borderline literature. I would get a whole other, maybe 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 1,000 would be kind of related to borderline personality. But if I type into the research database borderline personality, I'll get articles about borderline personality. That's helpful. These words help us to narrow our searches and our language and our understanding of each other. And, so these labels are helpful. But I'm also guessing, anonymous listener, that your therapist is going pretty well, and hearing me talk about it just helped further. And there's nothing wrong with your therapist. The label isn't something that, like, even the fact that you're open to hearing this is strong evidence that your therapist has done a lot of great work. Because if you had no insight coming into watching my videos, you either would not see yourself or you would be very upset about any implication around that. Anyway, going on through email. My parents have a toxic relationship. My father was diagnosed by my therapist to be a narcissist. Funny how easy it was for her to give a diagnosis for him, but not for me. Yeah. I mean, if you don't believe in diagnosing, how can anyone be a narcissist? I guess it depends on what people mean by it. It might be true or not that my father has narcissistic personality, but he has always been verbally abusive towards my mom. He is very volatile, and he gets so easily triggered since he believes everyone is against him. He shouted at me constantly. When I was little, I used to confront him when he was violent towards my mom. The sad part is that my mom would, in the end, defend my father, so I would just be left alone. No one defended me or cared about me. Well, anonymous listener, I'm so sorry that happened to you. It sounds just horrible. Just horrible. Just so horrible. I mean, just think about, you were a little child in that situation. When I was little, I developed an obsession towards a kid that I liked. I would constantly send him messages. I needed a lot of attention, and looking back, it was just so sad. Yeah, so not everyone with this condition as a child will exhibit this behavior, but they often will at least have urges, and sometimes will do this sort of thing that you see. It's an early version of the kind of idealization that you do as an adult, right? That things at home aren't going great, and so you meet someone at school or whatever, or maybe a parent or a therapist, and they seem trustworthy and safe enough, and all of a sudden, all of these needs come pouring out, and it's just like, oh my God. The analogy that I came to years ago was that when you deprive someone of food and water and you put them in the middle of the desert, and the person is, just on their last leg, and they're just crawling through the desert, and they see an oasis with trees and fruit and water and river and, cooling down shade, and, you'll do anything to get to that oasis. And you get, the metaphor works on a lot of levels. Like sometimes there'll be mirages, but anyway, you get there. You're not going to just sit down and go like, isn't the oasis nice? No. You are going to be like, oh my God, water and fruit and shade, and oh my God, water and fruit and shade. You're going to be trying to soak as much up as possible. And I guess to have the analogy apply here, you don't want to go to the oasis just for 5 minutes and then leave again. You want to stay. You want to move in. So when you finally find that person who might actually give you that nourishment, you don't want to have a normal friendship at school with the person. You want to be with them 24/7, because that's how children are, right? And we carry that with us even till we're 55 potentially if you have borderline. The kind of desperation you have at 18 months, where of course you want to be around your parents all the time. You want them to love you and shower you with compliments, and to see you and understand you and be with you and feed you and love you and have no complications. If you have untreated borderline and you're 55 and you meet someone on Tinder, or you meet a therapist, or you have a friend, you're going to treat that person like they are that parent that you never had when you were 18 months old, because you still carry that with you. And as a kid, you would do that to other kids, which, makes total sense. And yeah, I mean, you say, looking back, it was so sad. I hope you're not saying pathetic or pitiful. I hope you're saying that it's sad because you are feeling bad for that child that felt that she was so desperate that she glommed onto other kids, And anyway, little by little, since I could not solve my loneliness growing up, I started to control these urges to reach out. I would still stalk them and get obsessed with them, but I would repress the impulse to call them daily or tell them my feelings. But the growing pain and obsession and anxiety grows so big inside of me. Yeah. My boyfriend is so loving and kind. He deserves someone that can actually value and feel that. I try to remind myself constantly about how lucky I am because I feel so bad about myself that it seems that no good feeling can come in. Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you have a boyfriend that's loving and kind. That relationship, in addition to your therapist, is the road to wellness. Because you got it coming both from your therapist and from your boyfriend. Just keep going down the road. It takes a long time, and day to day, you're not going to see a lot of results typically, but over the long term, you probably will. And it sounds like that's what's happening. But you say he deserves someone who can actually value that and feel that. Part of that is that guilt. It kicks in, which is fine. You could certainly go to your boyfriend and say, hey, I have this issue, and it probably means that I'm distorted and or sensitive, and I feel bad, and I'm sorry. Actually, all of us can listen to this, that if you aren't occasionally apologizing to your partner for your bullshit, then there's something wrong. Everybody should be, whether friendships, any close relationship, if you're not apologizing for your bullshit in general, then stop that and apologize. Every once in a while, just be like, hey, I got issues and I'm sorry. And now that I'm not in a triggered state, I just want to say I feel bad. Thank you for putting up with my bullshit. Can you reassure me that you're putting up with my bullshit? You're not going to leave me? Okay, thank you. That should be done all the time. All of us. And if you have borderline, you should be doing that as well. And you should not be feeling like you're worthless. It's not black or white. Everyone does this. Everyone has bullshit. I have my bullshit. I apologize to my wife in the moment or soon after, and generally speaking, it's a wonderful thing to have someone that puts up with your bullshit. So you should say, thanks for putting up with my bullshit. So with people with borderline, because of the black and white thinking that's retained from childhood, there's this notion that if I recognize that there's something wrong with me, then I'm worthless. So you want to fight against that. Your boyfriend loves you. If anyone knows your bullshit, it's your boyfriend, and he's still there. So you bring something to the table. You bring love. You probably bring a lot of love. You probably bring a lot of neediness and a lot of attention and a lot of emotional energy that he lacks or wants or appreciates or sees through. Hopefully he's not taking things personally. Go to therapy, go to couple therapy, all that can help. So anyway, all right, last few emails here. Listener B, she says, hi, Dr. Honda. I just finished watching your Borderline series. I've been on the receiving end of borderline abuse in a strange way. Been on the receiving end. I am a public health consultant. A client at a large government agency exhibits every last behavior you have outlined on your channel. So like a coworker or a client at a large government agency exhibits every last behavior you have outlined on your channel. The never know what you're going to get next nature of our relationship, the swinging from loving me to absolutely attacking me based on nothing, and the lying she did that seemed like she just wanted chaos and drama. It ran myself and my team into the ground. Okay, so it sounds like there's someone, a client of hers, and she's a public health consultant. So she was hired by a government agency, and the client, so listener B has to accommodate the client because the client is hiring, right? Probably paying for the services or authorizing payment. And so listener B is saying that you never know what you're going to get because you don't know what's going to trigger, or maybe they were triggered by someone before, swinging from idealization to devaluation, loving to attacking based on nothing. And not everyone with borderline does this, but it is a hallmark for many. And you say, and the lying she did that seemed like she just wanted chaos and drama. That is a perspective that people have. Oh, that person's addicted to chaos and drama. No one's addicted to chaos and drama. I mean, we could talk about case by case, I suppose. But this notion, it's similar to the notion that narcissists get up in the morning and want to be narcissistic. These kinds of people will often jump to this conclusion because they'll see someone that's very dramatic or has a lot of chaos in their life, and even if you're giving them advice like, hey, maybe you should think about not dating those kinds of people anymore, or you should think about not interacting with your parents because that always seems to go poorly, and they don't take that advice and the chaos and the drama continues. The conclusion in our culture apparently is they're addicted to chaos and drama. They want chaos and drama. People don't typically want chaos and drama because it's chaotic and it's dramatic. It's harmful. It's unpredictable. So if it's true, which we can't know, that she, and the lying she did that seemed like she just, okay, so let's say she did lie. It could be distortions, right? That Chelsea seemingly lied about saying that someone told her that Jess was at that thing that he was at for an hour. Not even at an hour. He was out there for probably 15 minutes. He was gone from the house for an hour. That's either a lie or a distortion, right? I think, given all the evidence, I can't know, but my main hypothesis is that she was making a guess, and she was very sure that Jess was a part of the equation in that moment. It could have been that whole thing could have been based on that, but at the very least in that moment, she felt like, the paranoia says Jess is definitely a part of this. In the same way that a client will tell me they're convinced that I secretly want to terminate with them. It's not that the clients are worried I want to terminate. They'll tell me, I know you want to terminate with me. That thing you did last session, I know for a fact that you want to terminate with me and you're not telling me. And you're a jerk face for rejecting me. Because I'm not doing anything to reject them, but they feel rejected because of their history and their schemas and their paranoias. So they will literally just make it up and insert thoughts into my head because that's the way it feels, right? Particularly as they get closer. So for Chelsea, it's possible, I can't know, that she was sure that she was going to get abandoned. She was sure that he was going to cheat. She was sure that it was going to be with Jess or someone else. And if you're sure about all those things, then you don't mind making something up, right? I know it was you. I know Jess was there. So, or she actually had a distortion, a borderline delusion that she did hear from somebody that Jess was there. Anyway, so if listener B, your client for your consulting business or your consulting job, that the person's lying, it's possible it could have been something like that and wasn't an indication that the person wants chaos and drama. But I can't know. I unfortunately have an outstanding therapist. Oh, and by the way, having a coworker like this can be just as destructive as having a partner, depending on the situation. I mean, typically they're not as destructive, but they can be very, very destructive. I have had relationships at work with people that either had borderline or something similar. And when those people are remembered or brought up in conversations, my hands will start to sweat, even though I'm no longer involved with those people. I have a physiological PTSD-esque reaction because of what these people put me through because of their personality disorder. So it's not a joke. It's not just like a minor thing that you can draw a boundary with. For some clients that I've worked with, their primary current abuse that they're going through is with coworkers or bosses or whatever, even employees. Well, I won't go into specifics, but I've had people where I had power over them, and because of their personality disorder, I felt like I was the one without any power. It's a very difficult thing to be close to. And once they target you, they show you that, not all the time, but they show you that they're capable of anything. And even though you might on paper have a lot of power, and even if you have reassurance for people around you, like, you just don't know if someone's, if they really want to get you on a variety, at the very least, your reputation, right? But even kill you. Anyway, going on with your bill. I fortunately have an outstanding therapist. That's great. But these daily interactions with this client had me not sleeping at night, and it also had me crying almost every day. I found myself just ruminating on interactions and fear of her. I finally got off the account, but this person continues to abuse other staff I work with. Well, it's great that you got off the account, but yeah, yes, all those things. The stress, no sleeping, crying, ruminating, being afraid. Yeah, that's what happens. That's what happens to me, even though I understand this stuff. Now, when I have a client like this, I am regulated because I have the power to affect change, and it's my job to work on things. If I'm working with someone, then I don't have any power or control or ability to help that person. I'm just a powerless victim of their problems, So it's intolerable. It's very, very, very scary. It's all-encompassing. It will ruin your life if you have an untreated, pre-insight person with a full-blown personality disorder like borderline, and you get in their way or you trigger them or something. Like it is very, very difficult to deal with. Your series has helped me understand her. I'm not sure I'm at the point of compassion for her. I am still very hurt by how menacing she was, and I think of her as a monster. But I have a little more insight that perhaps will help me make more sense of what happened. So thank you for this. Yeah, you don't have to have compassion for anybody, especially for what you've been through. And I want to further what I was saying just a little bit earlier, that with my clients, I have tremendous compassion, and I have the ability to enact that compassion because the person is coming to me for help, and they participate, at least to some extent, meaningfully in therapy. If not, one thing I should say that I don't think I've said is that people with borderline, it's not all downside. There's a huge upside for me personally, treating people with borderline, not only just the gratification of helping them, but they can be some of the most caring people on the planet, but also some of the most caring clients. They can have moments where they're very appreciative of my help, right? Because once I proved to them that I am that oasis, they're very appreciative that I am that oasis that they were hoping existed. And they can be, of the clients that I remember that I recall or just pop into my head as making it true for me that I made the right choice as a career, a good number of those past clients had borderline personality disorder. So it's not all negative is the thing. And when you have a partner like this, it can be similar, which I did talk about earlier, right? Anyway, last email. Listener Jen in Seattle, she says, my father has borderline personality disorder with explosive rage and spiteful, belittling behavior, and my mom has histrionic personality. My mom feeds his volatile attention, and she mirrors some of his behavior at times. My father has borderline and my mom has histrionic. She feeds his volatile attention. She feeds on his volatile attention. So he will have volatile attention to her, and that's what she's seeking in a pathological way, is attention. And she mirrors some of his behavior at times, so acting like him or something. You have helped me to better understand the abuse and dynamics of my childhood, and you have helped me to develop empathy for my family while also protecting myself. Wow, that's music to my ears. Jen in Seattle. Watching you react to Love is Blind Season 6, I have been waiting for your reaction to the big fight between Chelsea and Jimmy. I knew that her behavior was upsetting to me, but I didn't identify the borderline behaviors. You've really helped me to understand the patterns. Also, I just want to say, when AD was watching Clay eat the soup at the table, I also found her behavior very odd. Yeah, just chiming in. I talked about this before, but in that video that I reacted to, I was like, is it just me, or is there something off or upsetting about AD's behavior towards Clay? Because when I watched the scene the first time, I was like, what is going on with AD? She's just sitting there glaring at him as he's trying to eat soup, and they're playing like the funny music, and the narrative is somehow, I think, being told to us that he's this ridiculous person having soup. Like, people have soup. Yeah, he picked it up. Who cares? I do that all the time. That's a Japanese thing. I don't know. Who cares? Even if it's weird and disgusting, it's not like it impacts AD. But she was just glaring at him and just rolling her eyes at him. And I'm thinking, what's happening? And I asked my wife about it, and she was like, I don't really know. And I thought, okay, there must be something about me. Now, I understand that, Clay previous to that had presented some concerning behavior, but that doesn't mean that forevermore AD can just like glare at him and judge him for anything that he's doing, right? Just disconnected from his behavior that was harmful, right? But occasionally some people were like, yeah, that's the way I saw it too. It was weird. And then, as what Jen is saying, is that later I said, well, actually, I heard from my contact on the show that they had a big fight the previous night, and maybe another fight that morning about her body, about him thinking she needs to be different or something. And they had a humongous fight that they just didn't include in the edit. And that's why she was reacting like that. And so Jen is saying, thanks for disclosing that, because it did make sense to me. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that people are weird for not having my reaction. That is not the case. That'd be ridiculous. I think we all understand that. But it's nice to know that I'm not the only one. It's like, and when I'm making these reaction videos, I record them and then edit them and then post them, and I have no idea. Because if I am the only one, and it is like a problematic take on something, I won't find out until it's already out there to the world, right? In real life, right? If you were here, I'd be able to say like, are you having this too? And if 1 out of 30 of you were just like, yeah, I was kind of seeing that. Well, okay, well, I'm not the only one then. Or is there a problem with what I'm going through? I just have to sit here by myself. Oh, in conclusion, this episode's really long already, but if you're still watching, I'm guessing that you are one of the few people that actually are, of a certain level of, I don't know what to say, but you like my content enough to stick around this long. So it's a smaller group. There's a whole graph that we see on the analytics that YouTube shares with us. Like they'll say, at this minute point of the video, you retained this amount of people that are still watching, and it's always tapered off. And so by the very end of a video, the percentage of people that watched all the way to that point is a minority of people that clicked on it. You know what I mean? Anyway, so for those of you that are still with me, I just want to talk about something that. So a few of you might have seen that on YouTube, I had expressed my feelings about someone criticizing me on YouTube. And I won't mention the video or the comment or anything. It doesn't really matter. I'll explain all the details that you need to know. But what happened was what I do when I will, because of time constraints, what I'll do is about once or twice a week, I have this calendar reminder that tells me, okay, do this for the thing and do this for the thing. And I have these reminders that tell me, okay, now is the time when you need to look at all the comments. And I like looking at the comments, and I learn from the comments, and it makes me feel like it's a community back and forth. And some of the comments are hilarious to me. And I like seeing people supporting each other, and I understand people better, so I can tailor my style of content better when I understand where people are coming from. And I also want to reward members by reading member comments and replying more often, that kind of thing. And it's fun to do so for me. So I was doing that a while back, a week or two ago, and I came across, well, I guess I have to go back even further, that during season 5 of Love is Blind, like 6 months ago-ish, I was, watching the show normally and posting videos. I could tell you the whole rigmarole, but the decisions that I make regarding editing and thumbnail, my wife makes the thumbnails, but the decisions she goes through, the decision I make about when to publish and how long the episodes are and what I edit out and what I edit in and what the intro should look like and what the outro should look like and what sort of things I should say and what sort of shows I should watch and what clips I should include and the way everything looks, with the picture in picture, everything is thought about ad nauseum. Every decision that I make on this podcast and YouTube channel, I've been at this for 15 and a half years, and it's a bit of an obsession of mine and always has been. And I am very thoughtful about all those decisions. And so when I publish things, it's not typically a flippant act. They are tailored to be the marriage between what you, and you meaning like a lot of people with a lot of preferences, so whatever that means overall, and what I want to do. I don't want to do just what I want to do, because if it doesn't appeal to anybody, I should just sit here by myself and not put it on the internet. So I'm trying to do what I want to do, and the Venn diagram of what the collective you wants me to do. The marriage between that, the sweet spot in between there is what I try to achieve. And I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I think I've succeeded to a large extent because a lot of people, or at least, enough people will consume my content and become members and literally pay my bills so that I can do this for a living. That's all I ever wanted to do. When I started the podcast, that's the only goal, or it's not the only goal, but that was a major goal that I had. I didn't think I would ever get there, of course, in the beginning in 2008, but that was like a fantasy of mine. I'm living the fantasy, and it's great. So I believe that I have a good sense, since I'm obsessed and I pay attention, and psychology is interesting in general anyway. It doesn't have anything to do with me. It just has to do with the topic. But there's a lot of things involved in finding that sweet spot. So when I was posting the episodes from season 5, and I was watching that scene with JP and Taylor where he talks about her makeup. And there was something about that scene in that when they were in bed together that provoked me to talk about a lot of things. And I don't know if I was yammering or what. I can't remember if the episodes were a little shorter than normal or something anyway. But what ended up happening was there were a lot of people watching that were really waiting for me to react to that moment where he talks about makeup. And when they see the scene, like they see that visual in the thumbnail and they see the little clips I'm watching, they're like, oh, in this video, Kirk's going to get to that bit. Well, I wouldn't get to that bit because there were a lot of bits in that scene prior to that anyway, but also I was reacting. And then people, the next video. So the next video come out, they're still in bed, and I don't get to that point. There were a number of people, maybe hundreds, I'm not sure, who were commenting and upvoting this sentiment that they were very frustrated with me because I hadn't gotten to that point, I hadn't gotten to that scene yet, and the videos weren't very long, or I wasn't posting enough videos in the day or something. And on one hand, I totally got it. I understood it and was fine with it. I also was taking it a bit as flattering because I guess people are really interested in seeing me react or wanting to know my thoughts on something. That's great. But the tone of it and some of the comments were pretty hurtful. People basically saying that I talk too much. Not basically, they were saying that. They were also criticizing that the episodes were too short and were, strangely strung out over too many days or something like that. And if you're still watching, then, hopefully you'll indulge me on this. When I'm watching a scene, I don't know anything about what will happen. Obviously, right? Someone even said in the comments, like, well, he watches it all beforehand and then reacts later. No, I don't. Why would I? That would ruin it for me. If it would be smarter to do that, I suppose. But one, that would ruin it for me. Not only just ruin the experience, because I want it to be spontaneous, just for my own sake. I don't want something to be spoiled. Two, I can't lie. Like, I won't be able to sleep at night knowing that I'm just flat out lying to people. Like that would be a fucking lie. And I have way too much, I don't know, just anti-lying energy to do that. Three, I would never have predicted this, but I think actually part of the appeal of this channel is that people actually want my honest, spontaneous reactivity. Seems kind of strange. I'm not calling you strange, but I'm calling it strange that anyone would care about anything that I say, let alone wanting me to have a spontaneous reaction. But I kind of get it because it's like improv. When I watch improv comedy, if I just think about the verbatim comedy that's happening on stage, it's not very funny. But when you realize that it's improvised and spontaneous, it makes it 1,000 times more funny and interesting to me because no one knows what's going to happen and they're just like reacting. And that's what I'm doing here. So also, I think I've always thought, and I like the kind of content providers that provide an authenticity. It's the sort of therapist I am, it's the sort of teacher I am, it's the sort of person I am. I don't want to be surface in any kind of thing that I do. And if I'm going to be spontaneous and I'm going to be authentic and real, I think I need not to have watched it beforehand. Anyway, so I don't know what's going to happen. And if I watched the scene beforehand, I would probably know or be able to predict with some certainty that, I bet you anything that makeup bit is what people are going to want me to react to. But I don't know that. I can't know that. I when I'm watching a scene, I don't know if it's because sometimes scenes and shows, Love Is Blind included, the scene will be literally 35 seconds long. Another thing I'm thinking of, not only just being spontaneous, is, well, what if I let a scene go by and I don't react to it? Sometimes people will get upset at me for that. And some people will just be nice in their feedback, but some people will get pretty upset. And I try not to let it get under my skin, but it does. It does. I've worked hard on it. I go to therapy for it, literally. I've talked about it ad nauseum. Anyway, I won't do it here. But so during season 5, I heard the very loud feedback. Again, some people are being nice, and there was, I think, an understandable energy around it. But the tone of it was so hurtful. It was like, you talk too much. What are you doing? The episodes are too long. And I'm guessing from the outside, if you read the comments, you would be like, it's just internet stuff. But I don't know. I can't handle that kind of stuff. And I thought I had been clear about that. And fly-by-night people that come in and out of the comments and say shit, I can usually tell. But these were people that, they're my people. Meaning, we're a team, you and me. I'm not saying it was you, but, we're all here together. And for those people to be saying this, it really threw me. And as with someone earlier, they can't sleep at night. They cry all day long. They become demoralized. They don't know what they want to distance themselves. And I was having all those feelings. It was hard. So I resolved in the moment, it doesn't change me that much because I've developed a system or a style or whatever, not only just in what I say, but also the way I edit it and the length of the episodes. Like, this has been established for a long time, and it has been carefully thought about and carefully figured out. what the audience wants, in terms of length. When I watch a video that is as long as this video is, I need to be convinced it's going to be well worth my time. Whereas if a video is 20 minutes long, I'm much more likely to watch it. A lot of people are like that. My episodes that are 20 minutes long, many people say they're too long. They want 5 minutes. Okay. Some people want longer. Okay. So I'm getting that feedback. It was very affecting for me. And then during season 5 and after, I started noticing that when I was editing, I would feel this like flinch of like, oh, is the episode long enough? I don't know. And I'd kind of go back and, oh, well, maybe I can. And you might have noticed that some episodes, they would get longer, which is fine if I'm responding to feedback, but I'm also flinching because I don't want to be attacked. That's not a good feeling. It ruins it for me, really. I'd rather be doing something else than to feel like I'm under threat of attack from people that I consider to be on my team. I'm not saying it's you, but now I think I responded, and a lot of people are like, oh no, Kirk, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was one of those people. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that happened. And, it felt good. There were a lot of really nice comments and a lot of really reassuring things, and that did repair to some extent. But I noticed months afterwards that I was still kind of flinching. Like I said, a lot of thought and care goes into how long the episode should be, what I should edit out, how much I should yammer, that kind of stuff. And it's not self-indulgent. It's an effort to try to, one, please the most people as possible, the collective you, and do what I want to do. What's the marriage between those two? And, I have a pretty good sense of what the collective you wants, and I definitely know what I want. And so what I'm doing is in that zone. Is feedback okay? Yeah, within reason, really. The analogy that I came up with during this whole thing was you go to a concert or a musical performance of someone that you kind of know, or maybe you don't know, and they play 8 songs, and one of the songs you don't really like, or in one song the rhythm is weird or the lyrics were not really what you would prefer. After the show, you don't go up to the person and say, hey, some of the songs are great, but that one song was terrible. I don't think you should play that one song. No one in their right mind would say something like that, right? Well, what I'm doing on this channel is kind of like art form because I am putting my soul into this. This isn't like just this assignment that I'm fulfilling. It's me that I'm putting out there. And so when people have a certain tone about it, it's like I think about that, one, and two, I am doing my best. And you people that are saying those things and upvoting those things, you might actually not be the majority. Is that possible? And there are other things to consider than, even if a lot of people want this, like there's a lot of things that are considered when I edit. I'm framing all this in a pretty negative way. Overall, the comments are great. Overall, everyone is great. Not even overall, but just like overwhelmingly so. Comments are neutral or positive. I get a lot of nice people saying nice things. So, I'm not like complaining. I just feel like I want to get this out there because if we're going to be on the same team, like if I'm going to be in a friendship with someone or work with someone or be in a marriage with someone, a big part of what I will problematically bring to the table is I won't talk about how things affect me, and then I'll get upset and wish that people would just know how things affect me. So this is me telling you how things affect me so that you can know and do with it what you will. I trust that it'll help everybody, help me to feel, hopefully, that you would consider before saying or upvoting anything. Maybe defending. I don't recommend you defend in a way that is ostracizing anybody, but just like a friendly reminder, like, hey, just to let you know. Da, da, da. And some people were doing that anyway. And I'm sure in certain circles on the internet, people would say, Kirk, you're a big baby. You got to grow up. You're not a real man or whatever. That's all ridiculous. This is me walking my walk, that vulnerability is a good thing. Emotions are fine. It's okay to be sensitive, even if all my sensitivity is my fault and some sort of distortion on my part. that doesn't invalidate it. It just means that it's there. I'm telling you the truth. And I'm telling you, if I could control it, I would, it's not a good feeling. So then once I got to season 6, I had that flinch, but also that the dial had been turned a little bit more towards having a little bit longer episodes on average. And I don't know if that's true, but it felt that way to me, that I was like, oh, normally I'd break this up into 3 episodes, but I'm only going to break it up into 2. Or normally I would have this be 2 separate episodes, but I'm actually just going to combine those 2 and make a longer episode. So I started doing that, and I thought, I'm guessing people will be a lot more satisfied with that. It is not hard for me to do. It's I'm a little bewildered that anyone would watch a 45-minute video. This episode, by now, it's, 2 hours in. So I can do that, and I don't want to be attacked. Then, as I'm going through this one day of comments, and I'm looking at a lot of the comments, I started to get this sort of feedback from different directions. Some people saying the episodes are too short, and I'm thinking, and again, one person, okay, but like several upvotes, like dozens and dozens of upvotes, people, yeah, I'm thinking, even pushing back on something I said, somehow that's easier for me to handle. Like the amount of effort that I put into this and the thought that I've been putting into this for 15 and a half years about how to edit things and how to package it and the length and the pacing and the stuff I edit out and how much I clean things up. I make it so that it's not annoying to watch. Like you notice my introductions on average tend to be very short, because when I'm watching a video, I hate it when they have 2-minute long introductions about nothing. You can kind of tell they're just killing time. I hate shit like that. So I don't do that. Why? Because I'm trying to have empathy for the viewer. Certainly there are times, if you listen to my audio podcast, I launch right into the topic. I hate so many podcasts. They will dilly-dally and will check in with you. Oh, what? So, the episode is titled like, narcissistic personality disorder, and you've never heard the podcast before, and you click on that episode, and they're like, okay, today's episode's narcissistic personality disorder, but I just want to check in with my co-hosts. How was your day today? Oh, my day was fine. Or remember the thing we talked about? Oh, yeah, ha, ha, ha. They'll do that for like 25 minutes. I'll be like, yeah, done. Unsubscribe, because it's annoying. Have the check-in at the end. If for super fans that want to hear those kinds of things, put it somewhere other than the beginning. Do you know what I mean? I don't always do that, but I try to do that. Sometimes I'll edit it out. Berto and I, or Bob and I, will have a whole long conversation, and then after I am in later on in post, I'm listening. That would annoy me. I take it out. I think about this stuff. So the length of an episode, I think about. So anyway, more people, and for many weeks there was nothing like this that I noticed. And then there was another comment, but I can handle it, and so I'm like, oh, okay, and duly noted, I suppose, but I'll consider that in the future. Then there was another comment, saying that someone was saying, like, it kind of was mansplaining, and it was like, again, this was a longer episode. I think it was like a 45-minute episode. I'm thinking, like, this will please everybody because, it's longer. And someone's like, hey, Kirk, you have to learn how to edit your material more, because this episode you were going on and on about this one thing. And I'm like, how many times do I apologize for yammering? 1, 2, you can always scrub forward or not watch the episode. And then all the upvotes. Again, if it's just a couple upvotes or even 10 so many upvotes. I'm thinking, all right, that doesn't feel good. I know that I talk too much. I talk too much in all aspects of my life. I mean, not like as a therapist or as a friend. With my wife and on this channel, I talk a lot. I edit out a lot of stuff that I talk about. But sometimes whatever I leave in, I'm thinking, yeah, I think that's important to leave in. So hearing someone who apparently likes my content but doesn't like it when I talk too much, I don't know. I get it. Some of my favorite content providers, I'll be like, yeah, get on with it. But I don't tell them that. I don't say, hey, you should talk less as if I were an artist and you came to watch me paint and I stopped and did, an hour and a half just yammering, okay. The content is me talking. So if I talk too much, it hurt. I didn't say anything because, or I might have said like, okay, thanks for the feedback, but I'm like holding it together. I go on, another video, another person says something like, your episodes are too short. Lots of upvotes, lots of people like, yeah, I hate it when he doesn't get to that one thing, and I'm just like, all right, duly noted. Thanks for the feedback. And then another comment, your episodes are too long. Okay, thanks. Kind of feeling like a musician on stage, and I conclude, and I'm in a raw space, and someone comes up and says, you sing too much. Or that one song, the tempo was too fast or too slow. It's like, okay, yeah, I have those thoughts too. I don't tell the artist. Or if I was close enough to them, like if someone emailed in or something and took their time to tell me something along these lines, but to publicly, I guess the analogy is you stand up after the concert and you just yell from the audience at the stage, and then a bunch of people go, yeah, that song was stupid. Maybe I'm too sensitive. I probably am. Maybe lots of other content providers, maybe they want that. I don't know. I thought I'd been clear. But, I was handling it. It happens, when you're a content provider, and especially when you read comments, there's a lot of ups and like occasional downs. So I'm still handling it. There's more comments along these lines, more upvotes, and I'm like starting to crumble, but I'm not really noticing. I'm sort of trying to cope and manage. Then there was this one comment that was probably the nicest one out of the bunch, but it pushed me over the edge, and I started to lose it, and I was shaking with adrenaline. All of a sudden, I'm like sweating, and I'm like, I'm gonna say something, and I don't normally, but I'm like, I'm gonna tell him like what's going on here. So I just start. I remember how hard I was hitting the keyboard. I was like, I think I'm gonna literally break my keyboard. I'm just like, I'm not trying to hit it hard, but I'm so like amped up, and that feeling, that you get when you have adrenaline pumping and you're hurt and you're angry and you're scared, just like that visceral feeling. It was, you're shaking and your voice is wavering, and you're just like, and you just want to cry, and you're just like, what do you? But I'm holding it together, and I'm responding, and I'm looking at the response, and I'm modifying it. And my wife is, telling me, hey, dinner's ready. And I can't even respond to her. And I'm just like, I'm not going to get up until this is over. And, there's this tiny voice of just like, just let it go. Like, don't worry about it. But I'm just like, no. Now, that last comment, like I said, was probably fine and would have been fine if it was of the first 10 that I had read. Again, it was another comment with like dozens of upvotes. And, I basically stand by my reply. It wasn't unhinged. I pointed out that I was having a traumatic sort of reaction. I don't think I used the word trauma, but that I was, a lot of adrenaline was happening for me right now. Because, again, I wanted people to understand, like, this is the effect it has on me. And I think I even said I'm probably too insecure or too sensitive or something, but can you just know that I heard this, and I think about this all the time, and just keep it to yourself, or say it in a different way, or know that my system is my system. I've had basically the same system of podcasting for over 15 years. I've had basically the same system of videos for 4 years now, of reaction videos. Maybe 3.7 years, because it took me a while to kind of solidify to a system. But, many elements that we established early, we still do episodes in Pacific time at 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock. I think Stacy established that right in the beginning. And just because some people want something to be changed doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to change it. I'll hear feedback, maybe there's things that I might change, but this notion of just I'm annoyed right now, plus I don't understand why it would be annoying. So, and usually what it's around, which I can empathize with and relate to, is if you really want to see me react to something, and I'm glad that you want me to see me react to something, and you click on a video thinking that you're going to see that scene, but then you have to wait until I get to that scene. Oh, another person, people were saying, you don't watch the clip long enough. How do I know if I'm not watching long enough if I haven't seen the clip? I don't know what's happening. Plus, this is spontaneous. If I were to watch it in advance and develop an outline, I could eliminate those things where I'm jumping in too soon or jumping in too late, because I could plan. I don't have that. It's a reaction video. So I am reacting completely spontaneously because I think that is a major element of the appeal, and I think contributes to the educational value, because I'm speaking from a place of spontaneity and in the moment from what I'm seeing. I don't have time to think in advance. I think that actually does help make the educational value impactful in a way that other content providers don't have, that don't do this kind of stuff. I'm sure if they do have that impact. And so what comes along with that element is that, yeah, I'm going to jump in too soon. I'm going to jump in too late. I'm going to sometimes not jump in at all because of the mood I'm in, or I just don't think anyone wants to hear me talk about that, because it's not predetermined. It's spontaneous. It's a reaction video. And so I would understand if someone were like, oh, don't stop there, Kirk, you got to wait. That's what happens. It's like going to an improv comedy show and thinking, oh, well, that wasn't funny. You should have said that other thing, or you should have done this other thing. If, there's a lot funnier or more interesting things you could have said. That's all part of the thing. It's spontaneous. It's improvised. So if that's not your thing, then I don't know if I'm your thing, I try. When I'm editing it, I'll say, oh, Kirk, you're jumping in too soon. But that's what I did. That's the reaction. That's what happened. Sometimes I say stuff, I'll go down a whole thing based on what I had seen, and then I'll continue watching and I'll realize, oh, I was understanding them wrong. That's part of the improvisational nature of a reaction video. And I think that if I start to manufacture that, I believe all of the appeal will be lost. And all the fun for me will be lost. So that marriage between what everyone else, I can't do what everyone wants me to do and all the elements they want me to do. I also can't do everything I want to do. I have to do what's in the middle. And that's, I believe, where the sweet spot is. And usually it's fine. So as I'm getting feedback in both directions, your episodes are too long, your episodes are too short, you yammer too much, you don't talk enough, how come you didn't say this thing, why did, da-da-da-da. And it just seemed to be a lot in this one session of reading, and I got to that one comment and I responded. I stand by it. Looking back, I don't know if I necessarily am regretful. It would have been easier if I hadn't responded, because I was losing sleep anyway, and responding now I had a new thing to be ashamed of, I suppose. But if I'm going to walk the walk, I stand by being vulnerable, and I don't think I was being unfair. Maybe a little overly reactive. I don't know. I don't think I was too much. Anyway, then people DM'd me, people emailed me, people commented below, including the original commenter and people who upvoted. Totally nice. Everyone's like, hey, Kirk, I'm one of those people. I'm sorry. I don't want to ever make you feel that way. You're right. My tone, or whatever. Everyone was super cool. It makes me cry just thinking about it. And on one hand, I feel like a fool, but on the other hand, if we're going to be in this together as a team, if I want to do this, there were a lot of YouTubers who quit YouTube recently. There's always people quitting YouTube. If I'm going to stay here, I think this is part of it. The closer we get, as I say, the more of the prickly edge of people's personality that you're going to experience. And if it's going to be sustainable, I think that we have to understand each other. And I strive to understand you, and I know you strive to understand me. And I don't talk about this in my reaction videos. It's not. I don't think it's particularly appealing. So that's why I'm putting it at the end of this video. Anyway, so when that happened, I was losing sleep over that. I was really fried. I barely slept that night. And I was wrecked the next day. It just shows you like how affecting it is. It's not just this cognitive thing for me. It really cuts to my core. It cuts to my obsessive compulsive personality disorder traits. It cuts to, I think, just normal hurt. It also has this element of, if you were here with me and you said, hey, Kirk, you're stopping too soon, I'd be like, oh, really? And I'd instantly just watch a little, because, I would have that real time. But I've already posted it, and then there's a whole group of people that are just like, that's dumb, that's dumb, that's dumb. And I can't fix it because it's already fucking published and completed. And I do these in batches. So whatever place I was operating from at that moment, I was probably operating in future videos for several weeks to come. Any sort of feedback I'm getting now, I will not have been able to incorporate that, even if I wanted to, for the next number of videos. That happens. I do these in batches. There are pros and cons to that. I've thought about that. Believe me. So that was reparative and curative to me, people being very nice and very kind, and I told them so. It's like, this actually makes me, I want to feel safe. I don't want to flinch at any point. When I'm talking, I don't want to flinch. When I'm stopping a video, I don't want to flinch. When I'm not stopping a video, when I'm editing a certain length, I don't want to flinch. I don't want to be scared. I don't want to have that pain of like, that reminder of just like, I'm going to piss someone off, and they're going to not only yell at me, but there's going to be all these upvotes, and these are going to be people on my team. If it's someone from the outside, fine. But if people on my team, feedback is fine. So I'm not chastising you. This might come across that way. I'm trying to emphasize to be convincing. I'm trying to be firm, because I'm probably never going to talk about this again. Because I want this to be sustainable. And even if all this is me being too sensitive, too unhealed, whatever this is, I do know that for this to be sustainable, which I want, and I think a lot of people want that as well, then me getting this out there and receiving really nice, it's the final step to this is, quite honestly, at least some of you being supportive of what I'm saying. You don't have to agree with it or accommodate it, but just understand, validate on some level. I will still flinch, but less so. If you were here in the room, you probably already would have said, Kirk, I validate you, but I have to wait until the comments. So I was not going to talk about this, but I had wanted to, and if this is still in the episode, my wife signed off on it as well. So just know that even with all of this, I would still be okay. This is really the icing on the icing on the icing of the cake. I overwhelmingly feel very positive and very safe and very held and understood and validated. If anything, people are too nice to me. People are very kind. And if this didn't change or doesn't change, I'm not like on the edge of closing the channel. It's just not possible. I would have to have so many bad experiences for my enjoyment and meaning to be eroded, to the point where I would quit. Things would have to be a lot worse for a lot longer of a period of time. I would also, I think, have to shut down as a human to not take care of myself anyway. So it's nothing threatening, but I sure would appreciate it if you just understood this. You don't have to change your behavior, but I'd appreciate it if you just kind of got this. I don't need people to defend me in the comments, but it would be nice, I suppose, if there's a upvoted comment that seems to be in this category, if there could be one person that is listening to me right now, just provide a time, just do that. That's all you got to do. Just say, hey, I kind of agree with you, but here's a timestamp of a video that you should probably watch. And just put the timestamp from the beginning of this whole yammering bit that I'm in right now. And then they can make their own choices. And know that everything I'm saying right now, I have been essentially rehearsing in my mind for days. Not rehearsing, but having shadowboxing experiences where I'm just like, on another thing. And hey, I thought we were friends. And I'm sensitive, like I had all these things like in the shower when, your mind starts to wander. I just start having these conversations like, hey, come on. And I felt like it came out pretty much as it was in my head, which I don't know if that's a good thing. So yeah, I'm sure I'll have a vulnerability hangover after this, but fuck it. Those are good things. Those are good things. People with borderline personality disorder or on the spectrum deserve to not black and white themselves. I deserve to not black and white myself. And if anything, I am not vulnerable enough in my life or on this channel or in the podcast. If you listen to the audio podcast, Berto, Bob, Rebecca are way more vulnerable than I am. This is my growing edge, as we call it. So hopefully this goes well. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. Truly, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you and want you to get your needs met and have good relationships with people around you. And yeah, take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.